Welcome, folks, to a very, very special match here. My name's Casa Corley, and I'm joined by Joe Lee. And today we have a treat for you: the Harvard versus ChessKid match. The match we didn't actually know we wanted, but it's going to be the greatest thing ever. Joe, welcome. We're going to have some really fun hand brain today. Tell me about it.
Hello, Casa. It's an honor to be here. And just like you said, this is not the match maybe people were expecting or know that we needed, but we have it. And I'm so excited to see these players compete. It's actually a hand and brain format. But let me introduce the players first and foremost. So, who's representing Harvard? It's someone that you probably already know, a former women's US champion, woman grandmaster Jennifer Yu, and her co-president at the Harvard Chess Club, FIDE master Chris Shen. They will be representing Harvard, and representing the Chess Kids are two up-and-coming superstars that you probably have already also heard of, FIDE master Tani and international master Alice Lee. So I'm very excited to see. Do you have a favorite in this matchup, Casa?
Yeah, I just got to add a little bit more seasoning to those introductions. We have two-time U.S. Women's Champion Jennifer Yu in 2019 and 2022. So she's one of the best players in the country. And Chris Shen, who I actually am familiar with, he's a very strong player himself, FIDE master around 2330. And then Alice Lee, international master Alice Lee, the youngest American woman to earn that title. And Tani, we all know and love this kid, right? I mean, he is a FIDE master, brilliant player, and has ambitions of quickly moving up the ranks. So this is talent galore, and it's really good to see this collection of talent play together. Now, as far as this match is concerned, who's the favorite? The ratings are actually quite close, and so I'm actually going to give a nod to the youth here. Because I think they maybe be a little bit more seasoned than folks that are, embroiled in study at Harvard, but it's really tough to say.
That's awesome. I definitely agree with you. It's going to be a tight match, but I'm going to go with the Harvard kids because I'm representing the college chess league. And I think that maybe Jennifer and Chris have a little bit more chemistry together. I don't know if Tani or Alice have played together before. So I'm going to give the nod to the college kids here.
Yeah, it's a fair point because I actually should kind of point out that I don't think they've done a lot of communication beforehand about what their styles are. And when you basically do hand and brain, styles can come into contrast and on conflict. So we'll see how that plays out. But let's actually talk a little bit more about the format and what we're going to see. So essentially, it's going to be 90 minutes total and 45-minute segments of hand and brain, where one side is the hand basically making the moves, and one side's the brain saying which piece to move. And so essentially, you could say knight, or you could say bishop, or you could say pawn, but you can't really say which knight or which bishop or which pawn. So very, very tough to make those decisions under pressure, Joe.
Yeah, and just a little bit more details on the format. You mentioned it's 90 minutes. We're going to do two halves of 45 minutes. The first half, it's going to be the girls playing as the hand and the guys as the brain. So it's going to be Alice versus Jennifer with their brains, Tani and Chris. And it's a 5+2 blitz time control, which is very fast, especially when you factor in that you have to wait for your brain to tell you the piece before you can make your move. So you only have 2-second increment. It's going to go by fast. And if they get under 20 seconds on the clock, the hand is going to take over at that point. Regardless if they make it back over 20 seconds with the increment, it's just going to be the hands from there on out.
Yeah, and it's totally understandable because at some point when you're in a time scramble, if someone's just gonna scream king, 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 or pawn, 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 and it becomes so frenetic that you just gotta let the hand kind of breathe and play essentially. So really, really fun stuff. We're seeing some of the talent on the screen. We basically have Alice, we have Tani, and it looks like folks are pretty locked in. So yeah, I mean, so it's gonna be good stuff, and I think it's gonna be a close match too. We're gonna keep track. Basically we're vying for bragging rights here, but but we'll see who comes out on top.
Yeah, and I'm excited for these games to get started. I know these players have been planning for this for a while now. And just a quick reminder, at the halftime point, we're going to take a break, and then the hands and the brains are going to switch. So first half, Alice versus Jennifer as hands, and second half, it's going to be Chris versus Tani as hands. Those are the two FIDE masters. So that's going to be really exciting to see. And you know what's interesting? I think obviously Jennifer and Chris are at Harvard, but I think Chris actually is a former chess kid himself. And obviously Tani and Alice have a bright future ahead of them. Maybe they could be future Harvard students themselves.
You know, it's definitely not out of the question. I mean, when you have the chess talent that we have on display today, usually these folks tend to be academically inclined as well. And so, you know, if they want to go to these types of institutions, I'm telling you, these schools come and knock it. They like talent, and they like folks that have demonstrated that type of ability in different disciplines. And chess is one of those disciplines, frankly, that helped me get into college. So I don't know about you, Joe, but it certainly is a nice extracurricular to have.
Yeah, being part of the high school chess club was a big part of my college application. And I actually was very active as a chess player at the UCLA club when I was a student there. And that actually inspired me to get into organizing college chess tournaments, which is now what I do at chess.com. So I'm curious, Casa, where did you end up going to school?
I wound up going to Duke in North Carolina. Yeah, it was, I definitely was a very active chess player in high school. And even even in college, I wound up playing Pan Ams with Duke University my senior year. And had fond memories of that. So, yeah.
I believe the games are underway. So I'm excited to see. We've been waiting. Alice actually is going to start with white. We're going to give white odds to the kids for game one. But we have it's a 45-minute timer. So however many games they can get in, if they end their last game with like a couple seconds left on the clock, they're going to actually finish that last game. And then we're going to take the break before the next half. So I wonder how many games they could actually play with 5+2 time control.
Yeah, it's tough with the increment to say, because there can be some games that go particularly long. But
5+2 is actually an interesting time control because it's the same blitz time control that we use for the Collegiate Chess League, which I know Jennifer has played in the past. So maybe that can help her as well, having that kind of familiarity with that time control. But all right, I actually hear the moves coming in. So
we're having a slight technical difficulty here. Just for a moment, I'm going to pull up the board very momentarily. So here we go. I've pulled up the board, and here we have a symmetrical English on the board. Yeah, E3, this move E3 kind of breaking the symmetry, but E6 can be played here, which is interesting. I don't know how much symmetrical English experience you have, Joe, but these positions tend to be very, very cagey.
Yeah, I actually probably know the least amount of theory in the room. So I'll let you take over any comments on that. But it's very fun when you're playing with a hand and brain partner, because you don't want to play necessarily the opening that you're most comfortable with. It's kind of a give and take, like a compromise almost. And even with the brain deciding what move they want to make, they also have to keep in mind what their teammate is comfortable with.
Right. And so, all right, right now we have E5 from the Harvard folks, and white has a little bit of a space advantage before this move E5. So white has a little bit more space. I maybe would have considered playing D5. Tani saying rook is suggesting to keep the tension with rook E1. And essentially he's arguing that an exchange on D4 multiple times is actually kind of favoring white, particularly maybe that D6 pawn is a little tender, that bishop on the long diagonal becomes an issue. But I think black's position is fairly viable right now. And we're going to have Jennifer and Chris right now figuring out their next course here. But yeah, interesting dynamic here where both sides kind of don't want to take and are keeping the tension. And Queen C7 is another move, keeping the tension here with those D4 and E5 pawns.
Totally agree with that analysis. I think they're kind of in a standoff. And just as a reminder to the chat, white are the chess kids with Alice with the hand and Tani as the brain, and black are the Harvard players, Jennifer with the hand and Chris as the brain. So at the halfway mark, they're going to switch hands and brains. But for the next 45 minutes, we're going to stick with Alice and Jennifer as the hands, and they'll be switching colors every game.
And I'm starting to like white more just because this queen on c7 is very vulnerable. Knight d5 can be a well-timed knight d5 can hit that queen. Maybe Tani's entertaining some bishop takes f6 dynamic as well. And that's why he said bishop there on that last move. Alice, without hesitation, played bishop g5 because I think they're kind of on the same wavelength right now. And white's moves are a little bit easier to play with the space advantage that white has right now. One thing I do like for black, though, is this move bishop g4, essentially pinning this knight and, again, keeping the tension a little bit longer. But, okay, basically, Jennifer and Christopher deciding to release the tension and get on with it in the center. So here we go.
Yeah, and these moves are going to be easy, like you said, for white. We just heard Tani say knight, so Alice taking that. The trades are going to be coming in. Do you think Harvard kids are going to take the knight in the center, inviting white's queen, or is there going to be some tension here?
Yeah, knight db5 is a really big threat, basically massaging that d6 pawn. It's a real target right now, and I think there's trouble in paradise for black's position here. Maybe tossing in bishop g4 could be clever, just hitting that queen. If you invoke a weakness or provoke a weakness like f3, you're weakening the diagonal in a chronic way. But no, all right, knight takes d4, queen takes d4. I'm gonna call the youngsters the prodigies, and I'm gonna call the Harvard folks or Team Harvard or something, just for clarity here. But I like what the prodigies have been doing thus far.
Yeah, I think also a good name for them, maybe the kids. They're doing great. So okay, we see g4 being utilized, but not by the bishop, by the knight, and this is a discovery on the queen. So the queen's going to get tossed around here a little bit. Are there any other threats that black has, or is white going to try to pile up on this d pawn?
Yeah, I mean, right now also the c4 pawn might be a little bit soft. A really great indicator for me of who's better and why, and I think it's really useful for folks that are new to the game, is usually the side that connects the rooks first is the side that wins the game, frankly. And if you really just consider what that means, it basically means that one side has more of their pieces out and they're more involved in the game. And if you're having a party, right, if you have a birthday party or whatever, you want all your friends to be there. And so the dynamic here is such where white has all their pieces out and black's still kind of struggling. And so I'd say white is better, even if they lost the c4 pawn, frankly, just because that dynamic is so significant. Queen d5 is designed to protect the c4 pawn and look at the b7 pawn. So it's a bit of a materialistic choice to go to d5 because you're saying, if I lose the c4 pawn, I don't sweat it because I have b7. Personally, I think the knight would love that square instead. So I would have been keen on dropping it back to d2 just to give the knight that square.
Yeah, and I wanted to quickly point out, you mentioned connecting the rooks. Black maybe have tempted to try to connect the rooks with the move bishop to e6, hitting the queen, but there would have been a really nice exchange sacrifice, actually leading to a win of material. So we hear the players, the brains, actually. I think Tani just called for a rook, maybe trying to bring in the rook on the a file. And we see rook 8 to c1.
That is a sneaky move. Yeah, it's a very sneaky move because rook a d1 is definitely more natural looking at the pawn. But Alice has aggressive intentions of, again, these discoveries with the knight coming to d5 or even to b5, frankly. So knight takes c4 is off limits. And hold on, queen takes c4 as well would be off limits. I'm going to back up just one move to show folks. If queen takes c4, this would lose on the spot to rook takes e5. That knight was protecting the queen, and now the queen's unprotected. The queen can capture here, but then the rook gets out of harm's way and wins the piece. So really savvy decision this rook c1. It's a tricky one, and it's one of those moves. The kids know what they're doing these days, Joe. They really do.
Yeah, these are some sharp lines, some sharp tactics, and they know what they're doing. We see the queen trade, and this rook probably gonna move to b8. Yeah, gonna get this pawn back on b2.
These light squares now are very sensitive. There's a lot of potential forking possibilities here. I actually think black is doing fine. Black's a pawn down, but the b2 pawn is hanging. Knight d3 is an idea. This knight to f3 is an idea. Trouble in paradise here. And bishop e4 is a move that's a little awkward, trying to cover these weaknesses. But maybe f5 is an option. Also, again, rook takes b2 is an option. Black is actually in the driver's seat.
Yeah, I'm really nervous about f5. We didn't see that though, just simply rook b2. And like, what would you do after f5?
Pray. No, honestly, after f5, I probably would have gone bishop g2, and I think that was why it wasn't played, because the bishop on e6 would have been hanging, so there would have been rook takes e6 ideas. So little tactics basically justify white's position, but I do like black, and the only thing I like about white here is the time situation.
Yeah, we see the c pawn fall. You did mention the time. We got to keep an eye out. If they get to the 20-second mark, it's just going to be the hand taking over for the Harvard kids. So that's going to be all on Jennifer there. That could be a strategic like way to use your time, right? Like if you're in a tough spot, you just get yourself down to the 20-second mark and then just play on your own. Maybe not so great for the brain watching, but how do you feel about that if Jennifer wanted to do that?
I mean, it's kind of giving a little bit of a disregard for your partner, right? It's just like, you know what? I got this, like, so, but, maybe it is a course or a plan a course of action you could take. I think the position here is actually kind of a little bit more clarified than before. I think the worst for white is over. And basically, if these pawns on the queen side liquidate, it's pretty symmetrical. So, I think both sides are kind of okay, and I'd say the position's close to equal, but the time here is going to be the biggest factor.
Yeah, I'm actually a little worried about White's bishop. Yeah, we see the bishop move, looking for a bishop trade, because if we allow the knight to take the bishop, then maybe Black's bishop gets into h3, and that would be pretty devastating. So
Yeah,
we don't see those trades yet.
also, keep in mind, there was this pin on the e-file, so bishop takes d5 is off limits. Really, any bishop move that black could have entertained with the light square bishop was off limits. So, yeah, Jennifer very, very alertly goes back to b8 and connects those rooks, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and she is under 20 seconds at that point. So I don't think we're going to be hearing Chris's moves at this point. I mean, maybe he voluntarily will say things, but Jennifer has the freedom to play as she pleases here. But the chess kids taking on a7, look at those bishops taking up those squares, and now a pawn's passed.
Yeah, all of a sudden, it seemed like white was winning a pawn, and there were some tactics here. Knight f3 is a possibility. Things are hanging everywhere. The bishop on d5 is hanging. Rook takes e6.
Oh
Wow.
my goodness.
That
what
is a
shot.
really awesome tactic that is going to ensure that white remains up 2 pawns. And let me tell you, knights struggle with rook pawns. They really, really have a hard time covering things. And look at this bishop. It dominates the knight. The knight is totally controlled by this bishop. This is a remarkable bit of converting thus far by Alice, who is, I think, playing on her own. She went under 20 seconds a little while ago.
Yeah, this is just Alice versus Jennifer at this point. I still hear Tani calling out some moves. They did get back over 20. But no, this should be a fairly simple conversion here for white.
And yeah, this pin by Alice makes a lot of sense. Oh, although there was a tactic, but this knight is trapped. The knight is trapped. That is incredible technique. Now this king will literally walk down, not the yellow brick road, but those dark squares and secure that knight on c1. It's totally hemmed in.
Wow. So yeah, that looks like a cool tactic with the discovery to win the pawn, but the problem is the bishop just dominates the knight, like you said, and this game is going to be over. So that's going to be first point to the chess kids.
Hold on. If you allow king f3, both pawns will be secured. This
Wow,
is
is
an
it going to be a draw?
incredible bit of counterplay. Bishop d5 is a very, very precise move, covering the entry square of the king coming to f3 and then picking up the knight.
Awesome
Savvy stuff.
technique. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's brilliant. Wow. What a start to this match. And I think we see a flag here.
My
So,
goodness. My
oh
goodness.
boy.
Really, really close game, I would say. Really, really close stuff. And then that tactile sequence at the end there from the chess kids was amazing. Like, if you just consider trapping that knight the way that Alice did with this bishop c4 is just incredible, incredible stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Game
Amazing.
one to the chess kids. If every game's going to be that close and exciting, we have quite the match ahead of ourselves. And I think we actually have game two underway. So
Hold on, let me navigate back to that game for a second. One moment here. There we go. We
nice.
are back, and we have a Nimzo Indian on the board. A Nimzo from okay, who's white here? White is Jennifer and Chris, the Harvard kids, playing the chess kids here with black. And in the Nimzo, white normally takes some space here in the center. It's an opening against queen's pawn. And yeah, it's usually pretty solid for black. Black has a little bit of a lead in development, but and gets their king castled quickly, but white typically has a better foothold in the center. So interesting to see that tug of war play out, Joe.
Yeah, and you mentioned actually I think Chris a little well. Do you know anything about the openings that they typically play?
You know something, I don't recall Chris's repertoire in particular, but I do tend to think that Jennifer's more of a D4 player. And so I think she certainly would be comfortable in this environment.
Yeah, we see D takes C4, easy recapture here for whites. That's going to help white get castled sooner. So I think you're right. Jennifer feels pretty comfortable here, and I think that now with white, the Harvard kids are going to try to get back, right? Game one jitters out of the way. But mad props to these kids for showing their stuff, and they're not backing down. This is going to be quite the fight from them.
Yeah, and what you're going to want to figure out here in the next few moves is who's going to connect their rooks first, because that's really going to indicate who is better in this position. Now, white can actually play bishop d2 and do it right away, but what Jennifer's trying to very alertly do is get the bishop to this diagonal, the A1HA diagonal, because on that diagonal, it's pointing directly at the king. And so both sides are basically going to have these bishops kind of pointing out towards the respective opponent's king sides. The difference, though, is that this queen was already developed already for white, and black is now a move behind and doing the same. And so I think white is just a touch better, and we'll see if that plays out.
I love that you mentioned there could have been that bishop d2 just quickly developing. But props as well to Chris for calling for those pawn moves, because he also knows that the bishop should be on that long diagonal, and that's exactly what we see them doing. So their chemistry seems to be good so far throughout this opening. They've got the rooks connected, like you mentioned, and now we see the chess kids trying to offer this knight trade here in the center, hitting this bishop.
It's actually a brilliant decision. If I could just go back one move, I think this last move, Queen E2, was actually a mistake. The bishop on C4 is hanging. You want to deal with it. But again, it's all about the bishops being primed on diagonals pointing towards the king. Bishop D3 is the move you want, because you line this one up against H7 to go with its counterpoint on B2, and you make sure your queen is also protected, so it doesn't feel like it's a real pin. The current position, though, if we now return to the game, now what happens after this knight e5 exchange is that this bishop actually kind of forced white to go f4, because the knight on c3 was kind of pinned. And this bishop on c4 is biting on granite. It's staring at the e6 and f7 pawns that are really, really stable. And so the question now with f4 is whether this is going to be a real weakness in the long term, or is justified by the short-term initiative and tempos that that white will get in the middle game. Although it's really tough to say. And is there a tactic here with bishop takes c3 bishop takes e3 and b5. Does that win a piece?
There is bishop takes f6.
Yeah, but and then maybe some piece taking on something taking on c4 would have been pretty interesting to me, but that's another story. So
Yeah, bishop takes on f6 followed by queen g4 maybe is really sharp.
yeah, those dark squares would be pretty sensitive. Okay, so tactical justification here with f4. If white, white's rooks are connected now. If white gets a few moves, there are going to be some nasty discoveries against this queen on c7. So maybe Jennifer and Chris have it all under control, and Tani and Alice are gonna have to show something here.
Queen move. That's definitely not the happiest place the queen's ever been. All the way back to b8, and now there's two pieces in between your rooks.
Yeah, and again, it's such an indicator of who's better and why. I tell people all the time, if you don't know anything about chess or how to even move the pieces, you just look at those rooks and it's are they connected? Yes or no? And a lot of times you know who's better.
Yeah, I love this last move, rook a to c1, because that's basically buying yourself a tempo. And we see the chess kids just preemptively getting the queen out of the way. But I'm interested to see how white's going to continue from here, right? You mentioned bishop to d3, I think makes a lot of sense. Maybe this knight wants to get out of the bishop's way, maybe to e4, offering some trades there. Meanwhile, black, they need to spend some time to get their light square bishop into the game. And just the move g3, maybe calling for a pawn push. This is something maybe Jennifer's like not too sure what Chris is going for there. It seems a little passive.
Yeah, again, you have to keep in mind here that folks are getting recommendations from their teammates and they have to go with that. So, Jennifer might not have wanted pawn, but she heard pawn, so she's got to make a pawn move. And that might have been the best pawn move to make. The better move probably would have been bishop. I'm going to show this really quickly. There are beautiful tactics connected to playing on these diagonals. And I'll just make a few sample moves. They're not good ones, but sample ones. Let's say you had something like this. There's a double bishop sacrifice that you'll see at times, which is check, check, takes here, check. And then there's all of a sudden this ladder mate, which is justified by that pawn moving up to f4. And so there's actually a name for that. I don't remember it, but those double bishop sacrifices connected to rook lifts are beautiful. And now with g3, two things happen. One, the rook can't transfer over at all. And also, now the light squares around white's king is what I like to call Swiss cheese. So this Swiss cheese structure gives black excellent prospects. And I think the tide is turning. The kids are back at it again. If these rooks get connected, queen a7 check does just that. All of a sudden, again, these diagonals can be really something. Now, e5 is a threat presently, but this bishop could drop back to c7 and then shift over to b6, and it's going to be black's bishops that lord the board. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's crazy how that move g3, bringing on the Swiss cheese, as you called it, that could be like one slight mistake from the Chris and Jennifer tandem. Maybe calling for another pawn move here. We see e4. Maybe that was the idea originally, going for this fork. But as you mentioned, queen a7, that's a check. If you push e5 and that check comes in, you have to block because you don't want to go to a light square if that e pawn isn't there anymore, because that bishop on b7 is just going to be a beast.
What's funny is e5 is definitely the pawn move you need to make to deal with this the threat of the fork. But if we go back for a second, just to illustrate, after bishop c7, if you said bishop, if e5, look at these bishops. After bishop b6 check, the king can't even move.
Yeah,
and it would win on the spot. There. And after rook f2, I mean, you could even pile up more pressure with a move like queen a7. Mm-hmm. So maybe even knight g4 eventually works. I'm just going to make two bad moves just to demonstrate. Even something like this could be really terrible with the queen lined up giving mate. Yeah. Something like that could be gorgeous.
That's brutal.
So all types of attacking prospects happen. And we had e5, f5, and then queen a7 check. Rook. This version is definitely a little bit better for white than before, just because the king has a little bit more breathing room now.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the player cams. They're definitely deep into thought here. They're all leading for, I mean, Chris has his hands over his eyes like binoculars. Tani's got his hands clenched together.
Okay.
These kids, they're playing like with no actual prizes on the line. They're just absolutely playing for pride and for bragging rights. I mean, if I was a kid and I was beating up on some Harvard students, like that would be bragging rights for like the end of time.
Yeah, for sure. And basically right now there's a standoff going on in the C and the D files. Both rooks are basically lined up here. Both kind of putting in work on the C and D files. It's tough to say who really wants trades, but I think black is the one that wants to keep piece on the board just because this E4 pawn is a real target ultimately. And I think, the kids might even add more pressure with queen A8.
Oh, G4 going all out, aiming for G5. This is pure aggression here from Jennifer. And notice her time. She's way down on the clock. She's gonna have to be playing moves on her own at this point. Well, once a couple more moves have been made.
Yeah, H6 is a really nice move, stopping G5 for the moment and also giving the king an escape square. H4 renewing the threat. So the kids have a decision to make here. Are they worried about G5? Is it a big deal? Can they essentially ignore it and add more pressure on the E4 pawn? Tough to say. Tough decision, Joe. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I'm definitely scared about G5 because your knight's gonna have to move somewhere. Definitely somewhere very passive. I don't see how you're gonna put more pressure on E4. Maybe like queen A8. Is that crazy?
Yeah, that was the move I was looking at as well. I think as soon as you play a move like knight H7 or something to sort of preemptively deal with G5, you're retreating. And so I think it's important to go forward here. And queen A8 would be the move. But Tani said bishop, and Alice responded with bishop E7, which is probably the best bishop move. Basically, dealing, making a bishop move, protecting the rook. Although now G5 did come on the board, and I think though again. I think white is starting to get somewhere. Now this knight on f6 is a move. Knight d5 becomes a massive, massive move. And I think this might have been what the kids missed. Knight d5 is a massive, massive idea here.
I heard Chris say pawn. He gave it over to Jennifer here. We do see queen a8, but I also see, like you said, there's knight d5, and I'm also thinking about rook h1, queen h5. That h file is completely wide open. And we might even see some rook sacrifices on h8.
Oh, look at bishop a2. That is a disgustingly strong move. If this rook even entertains moving, there would have been discovered checks. So that rook has to stay on c4, and white is winning here. White can pick up the rook whenever they want. And there's an amazing tactic. Queen takes e4 and rook d8 was devastating. This is also effective.
Rook to e2, taking advantage of the pin.
Oh, no.
Oh my God, bishop.
The counterattack is real. Rook g2. Alice is punching back in a massive way. Queen takes f3. It's not mate. Rook d8 is not mate. The king can go to e7. It's over.
If there was king f4, there would have been bishop to f5. Oh my God. And look at the player reactions.
I have to show this instant replay. White was totally winning after bishop a2. Totally winning. And all of a sudden, I have to show this really quickly, Joe. If I was white here, I'm going queen takes e4.
Wow.
This queen sack allows rook d8 double discovery check and picks up the queen. And that would have been clean up on Al5 type of dynamic,
goodness.
Right? Instead, decides to take the piece right away and misses a disgustingly strong check, rook e2, and all of a sudden there are huge problems. And the king is now tethered to the queen, but it can't stay tethered to the queen long enough. And that was all she wrote.
Bishop h4 was beautiful, and that was
incredible.
That was such a finish. And what a treat. I mean, that was only game 2, and the kids are up 2-0.
Incredible. The kids are strong these days. So anyway, we're back in game 3 now. The kids have a 2-0 lead. And they're white now. And then we have another queen's pawn opening. It's a semi-Slav this time. Although actually it's a kind of a weird semi-Slav because The bishop actually went to e7, so it's
King.
more an orthodox Queen's Gambit decline now.
Rook.
A less fun opening name to say, orthodox Queen's Gambit decline. That's what it is.
Pawn.
In these positions, they're typically ideas of playing knight e4 and trading a pair of knights and bishops, and this is very close to what some people might call the Lasker variation, although to play the Lasker, you would have had to need to play knight e4 there, and Team Harvard elects to go for b6. So a bit of a slower affair than the previous game, but we'll see how White handles it.
Yeah, I think b6 is pretty flexible. The bishop now can come out, and I'm wondering if Jennifer's going to put it on b7 or a6.
Yep, b7 makes a little bit more sense here. Although I think the last pawn move, it's funny. I think Tani actually probably wanted c takes d5 because in a lot of structures, when you see Black playing b6 early in the Queen's Gambit, you take on d5 and you argue that the c6 square is a little bit weak. So if I go back just for a moment and demonstrate, after b6, the c6 square is a little bit softer than before, and cd5 now becomes somewhat attractive because if you take with either pawn,
bishop,
this square is just a little bit sensitive, and the knight on b8 can't really move because this is a nasty fork picking up the bishop pair. So with all that in mind, I think that's what was actually wanted. We got a different type of structure, but I think the worst is over for Black now. White is probably White's still a little bit better. I can castle, connect their rooks quickly. Again, I'm going to be a broken record here, Joe, but getting in the c5 break is a huge victory for Black.
Yeah, definitely agree on your points on the capture on d5 perhaps missed, and that allows for Black to then take on c4, and now we have a queen trade, so we could see even more trades of pieces. I think, yeah, waiting for that call, we heard Tani yell out rook there because that's kind of the only sensible move.
You know, it's crazy. I would have actually taken with the king.
Wow, that is
and the
crazy.
reason for that is because in an end game, you know, with the queens off the board or queenless middle game, the king would have been nicely nestled on e2. If we ever get a bit further down the road, this king is going to just want to walk right back to the center at some point.
Yeah, we see White's throwing a punch on this d7 knight. I think Chris just called for a rook move, but the knight on f6 is going to be pinned now.
Yeah, no, it's hard to put more pressure on that knight, though. So as long as this knight on d7 gets out the way quickly, it'll be fine. The only thing now is there some pressure with bishop takes d7 because you'd have to take with the rook. You can't take with the knight because the rook on d8's hanging by the bishop. So bishop takes d7, rook takes d7.
The rook
would be something, but keeping the tension, probably a good choice.
Yeah, it looks like the chess kids are trying to double the rooks on the d file. And I want to point out, Harvard could take on f3 and damage that structure, but I think they're valuing the bishop pair, especially that bishop on the long diagonal is such a valuable piece. You don't want to give it up just quite yet.
No question about it. And knight e5 would be a tempo here, but it would be pretty easily parried. You could take on d8 with check first, and then just drop the bishop back to e2 and cover f3. And the bishop pair means something in chess, particularly in endgame. So none of that's happening. And yeah, we'll see another knight move, knight f8. All right, so Team Harvard is trying to get the knight to g6, alleviate the pin in another way.
Yeah, and so it seems both sides here are very welcoming of this bishop for knight trade. Just saying like, that's okay. Try to damage my pawn structure. I don't mind. But we see a pair of rooks coming off the board. Now this knight on f6 isn't pinned anymore. And as you mentioned, knight g6 is on the way. But first, inserting a6.
Excellent move, honestly. You hit this bishop with tempo. You take a little bit more space. b5 is also possible now, and that's what Chris just called out, pawn, and Jennifer quickly plays b5. It's very logical. These trades have actually helped Black. So Team Harvard is kind of clawing back, taking more real estate on the 5th rank with the pawn on b5. You know, getting the pieces into the game. I'm starting to like Black's position now because with the exception of this knight on f8 and this rook, which will probably go to c8 shortly, all the other pieces are standing pretty well.
Yeah, and with b5 and Black has the
Oh,
option
Bishop.
to play b4, but okay,
Rook.
Black's lashing out here. I was expecting this knight g6 idea, but instead we see g5.
yeah, really interesting choice. The bishop on h4 wasn't on a great diagonal, but
Bishop.
basically Team Harvard is trying to carve out more real estate on the king side and give the king extra loft. So not a really bad choice by any stretch, although the bishop now is definitely a little bit better than it was doing on h4.
Yeah, g5 definitely not necessary. I think if Jennifer's given a pawn move there, she was definitely looking at b4 and must have preferred g5 instead.
Yeah, I
Right.
think with b4, you soften up a lot of light squares and you allow this light square bishop on b3 to assert itself. And then knight a4 would come with tempo, hitting that bishop on c5. So not particularly impressive. Knight d7 threatens to take this bishop. This is a real threat, and I would be shocked if the kids don't say bishop right now.
Yeah, and where would
Bishop.
you go? Back to g3 or
Yeah,
forward?
sometimes you just gotta admit your mistake, essentially. I would probably go bishop g3 here and just kind of keep the status quo. It's funny, h2 is also an option, but then the king would have back rank problems, so I
Mhm.
wouldn't want to put it there. So
Yeah.
bishop d4, inviting trades. If I'm Black, I say no thank you and actually play bishop e7. Cover that knight on f6, and then knight c5 actually comes in. All of a sudden, there's a nasty fork here, potential for Black to get the bishop pair. Bishop was called out right now, and we're going to figure out which bishop move ultimately Jennifer chooses here, because this is a critical decision. She decides to
Ooh.
trade, which is also fine.
Rook.
Black, I still prefer Black. This knight could come to
Right.
c5. I think that's going to happen right now, actually. But keeping that bishop also is an option.
Yeah, and I think this rook slightly prefers being on d4 better than on d3. It was kind of awkward. So yeah, and knight c5, like you mentioned, is going to hit the bishop. If you bring the bishop back to c2 there, I'm just thinking about these like b4 ideas still, and there's going to be some discoveries maybe on the c file.
So well said. And we're
Right.
seeing it. Knight c5, this bishop now actually isn't moved. And I think that's actually a really smart decision by the kids, because after knight takes
Right.
b3, a takes b3, this knight on c5 is actually better than the bishop was. And now if white gets in b4, all of a sudden you start to
Right.
carve out some dark squares on the queen side. Maybe the knight on e5 winds up going to c5 at some point. I actually like this decision to give up the bishop.
Yeah, and mentioning those dark squares is
Right.
really key here, because we could see a pair of knights traded off, and we're going to go into a bishop versus knight in game, where the knight can live out on the dark squares, and that
Knight.
bishop could never touch it.
Yeah. Now there's a threat on the c3 knight now, so basically a decision has to be made on that. And knight e4 was played, looking at knight d6 check. Excuse me. It's a Freudian slip because I'm looking at rook c1 check, but knight d6 fork, which would probably precipitate rook c1 check. And dealing with these knights jumping around is not easy, especially when you're down on time. The kids move quickly these days, Joe,
king,
and
king.
we're seeing that here.
Knight.
Yeah, and they're already getting a little bit of a time advantage, and these knights are very tricky to deal with. And it also helps Tani really to
Knight.
just call out knights if he needs to,
Rook.
and just let Alice deal with, which option to go with. And I think that's kind of what he's doing here.
I think white is actually very close to winning. If white gets an e4 here in conjunction with some sacrifice in f7, there might be a rook d7 check at the end that takes apart that bishop on b7. So it's really, danger time here,
Knight.
because I would have.
Oh
the
my
fork.
God.
I didn't
Oh,
even
you
see
see
that fork. I did not
Chris's
even see
face.
that
It's
fork.
already like
Knight.
Yes.
Jennifer's
Nice.
feeling
Oh
not
my
too great.
goodness.
I think
And
the
look at rook
pain
d7
resigned.
too.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna be maybe even resign here.
Wait,
Yeah.
Alice,
Oh my
Alice,
goodness.
during the opening when I said rook, you could have gone
All
rook
right.
takes d7, knight takes
wait,
d7,
really?
and
We
Wow.
have some
takes
post-game
d8,
analysis
rook takes
from
d8 or
Tani.
rook d1, bishop c8, knight e5, and then you just
Wait, what move?
Yeah, I was
No. So you
Crazy.
when you played rook d3, You could have played rook
Oh,
takes
yeah.
Do they get to
You
do they
could
get to
have
hear
played
this
rook
post
takes
this
I was
this
so
little
excited.
analysis that we're hearing, Joe?
I hope that they're
Yeah.
hearing it because we're hearing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Oh,
There's
okay.
a lot
Takes
of back
instead
and
of
forth
bishop
going
f6,
on,
takes, you go bishop d8, rook
and the
e1.
kids aren't
Okay.
satisfied.
Yeah.
Essentially,
Like,
they're basically
yeah.
saying we could have done this instead of this instead of this, and yeah, it's really good stuff. I'm gonna just very quickly instant replay that moment there.
Pawn.
It all kind of turned when
Pawn.
essentially the kids decided to give up that bishop
Pawn.
for the knight and recognize that the dark squares potentially could be long-term
Pawn.
trumps, but really that their bishop on b3 wasn't doing anything.
Knight.
And a few moves later, there was pressure on f7 and forks galore. And I frankly did not see knight e8 check.
Yeah,
which
that
is
was
super.
missed by Jennifer as well.
Yeah.
So tough. I was thinking that rook
Knight.
c1 check that you mentioned, but there were so many issues. So we have game 4 now underway, and
Yep. And I'm going to switch
Pawn.
over to it just in a moment. So we got that. Here we go. The kids are now black
Pawn.
and the Harvard folks are white, but this is a 3-0 lead. So
and there's only 7 minutes remaining in the halftime.
Bishop.
So Harvard is facing a potential sweep in the first half. They're definitely going to try to get at least one win. This could be the last game of the half.
Oh, just king.
yeah, and so right now we have a Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation. And in these structures, usually white has 2 different plans. They could play for a minority attack with b4, b5, or they sometimes can play for a break in the center with e4. If that knight goes to f3 early, though, it means that the minority attack is usually the plan. And so I think that's what we're going to see from white. What black does is actually trade a few pairs of minor pieces to alleviate some pressure in the position. And the kids are doing that. They're traded a pair of bishops. They got the knight d4. And this knight d4 is annoying because you can't take with the knight, because if you do, there's a really nasty fork here. And if you take with the bishop, this knight has to go back. And sometimes this pawn can be used as a wedge to create some attack on the king side, particularly with h5, h4. So the kids know what they're doing here. And I'd expect probably white to initiate the minority attack, although knight d2 is a surprising move.
And we see Tani's calling for a knight here, and Alice is just going to reinforce that already annoying knight in the center. And Chris is calling for another knight move here. So we could see some trades, or we could see some more maneuvers. But yeah, knight D takes.
Pawn.
And pawn is absolutely the right decision here. Now, all of a sudden, black has some actually serious attacking prospects on the king side. Something along the lines of h5, h4, h3, long-term is pretty dangerous. Now, white's going to go bishop c4, and maybe, excuse me, I spoke too soon. I was going to say maybe bishop c4 and then playing f3, maybe trying to get something along the f7 square. But yeah, ultimately, different decisions were made. Bishop f5, it's a controversial decision here to put the bishop here, because what's the scope? First of all, e4 is not being attacked, so it didn't need to go there.
Yeah.
And second of all, it might be a little bit loose there. So I maybe would have gone for a different choice, but it's also very good on f5 too.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned this f3 idea, trying to chip away at, black's central pawn. But that pawn's kind of pinned now with the bishop on f5, but it goes both ways, sort of. If black takes on f3, there's going to be an attack on white's bishop. So it's very interesting to go there.
F3 just doesn't work, actually. After f3 takes, let's say queen takes f5, you can toss in queen takes e3 check first. It's a really awfully strong intermediate move, and then you take on e2, and black's carving up the king side. So yeah, a3, trying to go for that minority attack. The problem is that, essentially, I don't think it's going to be the end of the world here, because black's has the rooks connected, and they might have some pressure with h5, h4, h3 later in the game. So we'll see if white's able to make inroads against the c6 pawn.
Yeah, any knight move comes with a discovery, and black's going to have to tend to that backward c pawn. But I'm just very impressed by how the kids are playing right now. I think the Harvard students may be a little shell-shocked right now. They're in this 3-0 deficit, And even with the white pieces here, they're facing a potential 4-0 deficit going into the second half.
And it must be said that the younger generation, they've played online literally their whole lives. And I think we see here constantly up on the clock, constantly making quick decisions. Again, the kids are up a minute on the clock, and that means something when, these games come down to time scrambles. So I think that's a huge part of it too.
Yeah, well said. And I do want to say, though, even though Harvard hasn't gotten any wins yet, I think maybe they just weren't ready for Alice and Tani tandem. Maybe they haven't been preparing, but if they get a win right here in this game, that's going to give them some momentum going to the second half. And I think it'll also calm a lot of their nerves. Once you get that first win, that momentum helps out a lot. And you can finally just kind of like take a moment and calm down and relax.
Yeah. And now, right now, it's a little bit of a tug of war here because this C6 pawn is a really big weakness. So if White was able to get to some type of end game where the queens are off the board and, you could really focus on this weakness, White would have something to say because the pawns are on dark squares, beautifully complementing the light squared bishop. Black's pawns, on the other hand, aren't really complementing the bishop well. So there are targets for White to work with. I think the kids aren't going to allow an endgame anytime soon. If the queens aren't going to come off the board anytime soon and Black plays for activity, it's going to be hard to keep things under control. And this knight on c3, where's it going? That's one of the issues you'll sometimes see when you play for this minority attack with b4. A lot of times people actually prepare b4 by bringing the knight to a4 first. And I'm going to very, very quickly take you back to a position much earlier in the game before b4 is played. A lot of times you'll see a move like knight a4 first. And the idea is that if b5 comes, your knight lands on c5, and then you initiate the advances. So that's sometimes something you'll see, and it is something that basically the Harvard folks didn't get a chance to do because this knight is now stuck there.
Yeah, it's a tough knight to activate, but I do want to mention Black's bishop on e6 is doing a very important job of defending the rook on c8, because otherwise there's maybe some takes on b5 ideas unveiling a discovery with White's rook on c1. So this move d5, very aggressive and maybe taking advantage of the fact that Black's bishop can't really take.
Yeah, and it's actually a really brilliant move, basically solving that problem with the knight. The point is, actually, you're not going to be able to take twice on d5 because you're not going to be able to sack your queen as White. It's just not worth it to sack your queen for the rook and minor. But what you're going to do is you're going to get this b5 pawn at the end of the line. And so if we have something like knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes b5, basically makes this pawn c6 overloaded. And as a result, you probably get to a position like this where, I would say the worst is over for White, essentially. And it's probably close to equal, although Black would still have to take care and even White too, because both kings are still a little bit airy. I could see, greed taking over, and then all of a sudden, checkmate being a huge problem.
Ouch.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, back to the game. The kids have 2 minutes to think about what to do with d5, and they recapture on d5.
Okay, and here we see the knight takes b5 tactic that I mentioned with immediate tempo on the rook on a3, which we hear Tani calling for Alice to get it to safety. Comes all the way back, and now, we see the knight's going to have to move and putting more pressure on this c6 pawn.
Yeah, and so the question here is who's better and why? Your initial instinct is to say, White is clearly better because this pawn feels a little bit safer than the c6 pawn, and the knight on d4 is more active than the knight on f6. But if these pawns come off the board, it'll be definitely an equalist position. I think Black's going to try and double now. I think the kids are going to try and double and put enough pressure on the b4 pawns that it's not a huge weakness, or that their c6 pawn is not a huge weakness.
Yeah, I think Tani did just call for the rook move, so we'll see what Alice decides to go with here. Okay, going rook c7, aiming for b7, I suppose, but isn't the c6 pawn going to be weak?
Yeah, I would have basically taken the other route with the rook, but okay, if the pawns are traded, I think black is happy with that.
Okay.
And maybe the Team Harvard is trying to just get on the board here. It's been tough sledding early on, and they may just want to settle things, especially being down on time as they are.
Queen.
Yeah, and this is going to be the last game of the first half. So this
Queen.
is Harvard's last chance to get on the board before our
Pawn.
break coming up. So the moves are flying in now.
Bishop.
Actually, Harvard hit the 20-second mark there with that last move. So
Bishop.
And we seeing more
calling.
trades
Knight.
happening here. I think the position is basically equal, but practically speaking, white could argue that they have a little some because this e4 pawn might be a little bit sensitive, maybe a bit more of a target than any of white's pawns, but objectively black should be fine here.
Yeah, that's very interesting. At least the position is okay. We hear Alice is asking Tani if he said anything, and he says that he's thinking. So Alice may be getting a little. Wait, did he say something? Did he mess up? No, they said queen.
Okay, all right, good. I mean, there weren't other pieces to move. I mean, you're gonna say pawn there and hit the queen.
That's what
tragic.
Alice is so confused about, right? Like, why aren't my queens hanging, Tani? Like, please make sure we don't blunder that.
Right. And yeah, no, and basically, Team Harvard here is saying, I want more, because queen b4 is a ambitious move, I want to say, because you could have taken on d3 and then tried to bring your king over and tried to actually secure the d3 pawn that way. Keeping the queen on the board is ambitious. I would have traded the queens and played king f1.
Yeah, you think that d pawn would have been a gunner?
Definitely a target.
Yeah. So okay, we see queen being called for. Both sides going to get into a bit of a time scramble here. The queen's keeping an eye on f7 here because there's going to be this queen check.
Yeah, Team Harvard is on their own right now. Jennifer is on her own. Alice is not quite there yet because she's still got 30 seconds. But once she gets under 20, she'll be on her own too.
Yeah, I felt like queen f8 would have been a strong idea there, but we see the knights coming in.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a queen trade right now. Oh, no, we can't no longer because the e4 pawn is hanging. So queen e5 would blunder a pawn. So Team Harvard's still trying to play for the win, even with 3 seconds left.
I think he called for knight. I think they are going to trade queens. But, oh, no, queen. Okay.
The head offers a draw.
Oh, we hear a draw offer from Chris. And the kids are going to play on.
Knight g3, walking into this pin, all of a sudden h5, h4 is an issue.
Okay, so the king comes back. There's a check and a knight block. Okay, queen trade here now.
Draw.
Okay, Tani offers a draw as well.
All right.
You know what, Alice, you know what I was thinking? I was actually thinking of a move.
I thought we lost after 97, actually.
Oh, yeah. I was actually thinking
so the kids agree to draw with
Team
Harvard.
Instead of taking
incredible.
Yeah, Harvard on the boards. They're not getting swept, but they're also not happy with this performance. The kids definitely in the driver's seat, and they're going to look to close it out. But we do have a second half.
I actually missed d5. I was
Chris
thinking
and
like
Tani as the hand, so it'll be interesting to see if they can come back.
For sure. And yeah, it's going to be a Herculean road to get back because the kids aren't even giving an inch here. And yeah, I mean, 3.5 to half. I mean, it's been a little bit of a drubbing thus far.
Yeah, and it's very hard to come back in the same time control with 5+2. So it's going to be really interesting to see if maybe there's a chemistry difference with the hand and brains switching that maybe the Harvard kids could play off of. So before we get to the second half, though, we're going to be taking a break. So the players are going to take a break, and we have a couple of announcements to make and share with you all. So I'm very excited to share. ChessKid, for the first time ever, is having the ChessKid Festival which is going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. You can book your tickets now for 4 days of chess festivities, including over-the-board tournaments and opportunities to meet special guests like Gotham Chess, Fun Master Mike, and Chief Chess Officer Danny Wrench. Festival takes place February 16th to 19th, and we can't wait to see you there.
Okay. Yeah, I see it too.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We just watched the first half of the Harvard versus ChessKid match in Handed Brain, with the ChessKids with an awesome performance, 3.5 to a half. But before we start the second half, we do have a quick break. And before that, we wanted to mention there's going to be this awesome ChessKid festival from February 16th to 19th. But also this weekend on the college side, we have the Collegiate Chess League semifinals, with UT Dallas taking on their state rivals, University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley on Saturday, as well as Mizzou taking on their in-state rivals, SLU, after that. So definitely be sure to tune in for that. And the finals are going to be the following day on Sunday, November 19th. And we're going to see some of the top college chess players in the nation fighting it out for the CCL championship. Use exclamation point CCL in chat for all the info, and we'll see you all this weekend. So stick around for the break. We'll be right back. welcome back, everyone. We've got the second half of the Harvard versus ChessKid match underway. We're waiting for the games to start, but as a quick recap, in the first half, we saw the ChessKids take down the Harvard team 3.5 to a half with a 3-0 start, and then finally a draw on the fourth game. So we have the second half going to be another 45 minutes, and this time they're switching hand and brain. So we're going to have Chris from Harvard taking on Tani from ChessKid, with Jennifer and Alice being their brains. Casa, I don't know if they're going to be able to get a comeback here. I think it's going to be tough, but what do you think?
I'll say this, the matches have definitely been closer than the score would indicate. I think a lot of it has come down to time scrambles where really Alice Lee on more than one occasion was able to come up with some incredible tactical resources. And Tani was recommending good moves before they got to that moment. So I think it's basically the adjustment from the Harvard folks is going to be, I'm giving them a little inside adjustment here, a little coaching here. Play a little bit faster, because you do not want to be in a time scramble with someone born after the year 2000. You just don't. And I think that's been the dynamic thus far.
Yeah, that's good advice. Definitely stay up on the clock. And actually, the clock is going to be their enemy here, because they only have a 45-minute timer to come back. And 5+2, I feel like these chess kids can really try to draw out the games, especially maybe like after each game, maybe analyzing a little bit, taking some time before the start of the next game. These kids, I think they see the victory in sight. Now it's just a matter of execution. And I do want to mention, it's tough being, a college student, having to balance chess and like extracurriculars and studying, right? These kids, obviously, they're in school still, but it's a much different school dynamic than being a college student, right? Although I do want to mention, I see Alice has a periodic table in her background, so it suggests she's being very studious, I'm sure. So yeah, I don't know what they're all studying, but it's got to be tough to manage that workload as a Harvard kid.
Yeah, no question about it. I think we definitely have to give the kids credit, though. These are folks that are also pretty academically inclined, in Alice and Tani, and so I would say the one really big difference between the chess kids and the Harvard folks is, basically they don't have to. They have to worry about how they're going to feed themselves every day, right? When you're at school, the parents aren't around. You've left the nest to a certain degree, so that makes a difference. So, but anyway, have a game underway, so I'm going to go to that right now, and we have E4, which has been a rare guest in our match thus far. It's been a lot of D4 business, and we have a French. Joe, we have a French. What do you think about that?
Well, I love that we're seeing some E4 moves, because Jennifer and Alice, as the hand, were only playing D4. So now with Tani with the white pieces, we can finally see E4. And as you mentioned, a French exchange. This is not as popular as some.
I'm surprised. I thought we'd get something more like an advanced variation or one of the more aggressive systems. Black tends to be okay in these symmetrical Frenches, but white is going to try and use their extra tempo essentially and make that really meaningful. But yeah, the symmetry thus far has not been broken. Nice. So we're going to see who breaks the symmetry first. And if I'm black here, I'd probably go C6 to stop knight B5. I think playing and further symmetrical stuff what kind of plays into well, I stand corrected. Say it plays in the white's hands. Knight B5 here, I think, is a really nice move, though. I think knight B5, knight B4, knight takes D6, knight takes the D3, knight takes F7. I think eventually black can't keep copying white. So I would be shocked if there's something there.
Yeah, instead just bringing a bishop out, just developing a piece that hasn't moved yet. Knight B5, like you mentioned, is definitely aggressive, going for the dark square bishop. But no, they're completely keeping the symmetry here.
Yeah. And right now, it's shocking, honestly. I have not seen this type of symmetry this long.
And you can press X on your keyboard.
There it is. It's the first non-symmetrical move.
Nice.
Rook
just hover
E8.
over the board and press X.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
Jennifer's going for the knight move.
But you don't have to
So I
hover
see
over
some
the
folks in
board.
chat
But
saying
okay.
that you can't see the board
night.
on screen. We're gonna
Night.
work that out momentarily, and in the interim, we're gonna narrate while we work out
There
that
it is.
technical difficulty. But there we go. All right, knight b5. The board is live. It's back. Thanks, folks in chat, for pointing that out. But basically, knight b5 hits this bishop on d6, and I think we'll probably see bishop f8. Just drop that bishop back, preserve the bishop pair. Yeah, I think that's probably what we'll see. But I'm very surprised knight b5 didn't happen a few moves earlier, because it would have had more punching power. So I'm just going to go back for a second and show that. After knight b5
Right.
here, bishop e7 isn't as impressive, because bishop f4 would have hit the c7 pawn. And in previous positions, or later positions rather, rook c8 could easily defend it. Here you'd actually have to calculate whether you can get away with sacking with a6 and figuring out whether the knight is trapped or not. So a little bit of a different
Right.
dynamic, but we're back to the game position. And wow,
Yeah, didn't save
Knight.
the bishop. We see that
Haim
knight
Harvard
traded.
said, yeah, well, I'll take the bishop here. I do not love this. I think white is now clearly better. Can go queen d2 and bishop f4, hit the queen on d6. And if white now,
Night.
or sorry, if black tries to trade the bishops with bishop f5 to try and get rid of the bishop pair, this bishop will drop back to f1 and say, no, thank you.
Yeah, so the chess kids with the bishop pair looking to add on to their already large 3-point lead. Yeah, I'm curious to see what the breakthrough is going to be here. I'm expecting some pawn breaks at some point, maybe with the c pawns, but it has to do some preparatory work before that can be played.
Well, the thing is, if either side pushes their c pawn, they're going to give themselves an isolated pawn. And so the question is whether that's a worthwhile transaction. I think they're probably going to remain not going for the breaks and playing with the pieces. And you see here, we saw a previous game where the bishops pointing towards the king side was dangerous. Similar dynamic is happening here. This bishop now looking at the queen on d6, also looking at h6. Again, black's actually connected their rooks first here, but white has enough control in the center where it doesn't matter yet. And, you know, the kids are going to go consider something like queen f3, queen g3, or queen d2. In fact, queen d2 here is a really nice move, because queen takes b2 would be not possible, because rook eb1 would trap the queen. So I'll just show that really quickly. Queen d2, queen takes b2, rook b1. And the queen is nowhere to go, because, Joe, what's wrong with queen takes d4?
Yeah, you get that nice discovery check with the bishop. So nice find there. That b pawn is definitely not going to be taken. But white didn't even go queen to d2, instead bringing the queen all the way out to h5 after trading those knights. So this is definitely very aggressive here from the chess kids, just maybe even lining up sacrifices on h6. But the queen on b6 is around to defend, so definitely keep that in mind. But maybe a rook lift as well, like rook e3 to g3 is going to be very annoying.
Yeah, and I think basically what white is relying on is momentum, because you could say, well, isn't the b2 pawn hanging? And really, you know, the kids are saying, well, actually, if you do that, your queen is, you know, over yonder, over here, and the king is the most important thing. So not going to have that. Now, bishop e5 is a really savvy choice if it works, and to just get rid of the bishop pair, get rid of that attacking bishop. I say if it works because it did feel like there was some, if white could get in a move to kind of shake the tree, it might have been fine. But okay, actually, given this trade now I'm starting to think that black, if they manage to trade the queens, has a nice little grip here. The c4 square is firmly under control. A4 is also firmly under control, so white doesn't have any really great breaks.
Yeah, we see rook e3, the rook left, maybe going to double on the e file, which is going to be pretty annoying for black to deal with, but also maybe bring the rook to the king side, rook g3, and pinning the g pawn to the king. So definitely a very aggressive here move here from Tani, and Chris and Jennifer are going to have to find a way to defend. You mentioned queen trading. Maybe like, is queen g6 an idea?
Yeah, you definitely are looking at this move. The thing that you're concerned about is the c7 pawn. Now, maybe there's some counterplay with queen g6, queen takes, knight takes, bishop takes, and then a move like rook c8. and all of a sudden getting the c2 pawn back. But you're reluctant to go for this when you also consider, man, all of my pawns are unprotected and potentially targets. So it's a tough decision to go for, because even in a position like this, you might have some problems defending your remaining pawns. And so that's really why the queen trade is hard to get off right away. And if you go c6, which makes all your pawns protected, your queen then can't scurry over to the king side. So that's really why, again, the Harvard crew are down a minute on the clock, and they can't keep getting themselves in these situations.
Oh man, queen takes on d4, basically a gambit from white for this activity. Look at bishop to e5, just attacking from both sides. This is a brilliant move here, and there's going to be a ton of pressure on this black king. Are there already some sacrifices? I mean, rook g3 seems very sensible.
Well, the thing is, this knight comes to g6, and amazingly, everything is kind of covered. So I'm actually thinking maybe you try to get the pawn back with a move like rook c3. You also protect c2. You enter on the 7th rank. I just heard rook called out, so we'll see where Tani decides to go with that rook. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be moving this rook on the e file somewhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe even doubling on the e file. But I agree with you. Rook c3 is definitely a clean move, and there's a lot of options here for Tani. Do you go for the king? Do you go for the queen? Do you just double? So rook is a super flexible call from Alice, and we do see the doubling here. So
wow, and Tani goes for aggression. I think it's maybe more attuned to his style. It's tough to say. I think Alice also is quite an aggressive player, but I think this allows some trades, some rook trades. Black would love to trade 1 or 2 pairs of rooks here, and I don't see any breakthroughs on the king side. So I would have gone rook c3 just because I keep all the rooks on the board, and the complications continue. This one, it might give the Harvard folks a little bit of life again. And I should say, it's kind of funny because when you have younger players playing older players, the old adage is, oh, get the kids into an end game, get them into a non-tactical position, and then you'll have better chances. And it's kind of what Team Harvard is doing. They're like, we need to actually trade pieces. These kids are too vicious with the tactic stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, when you're an adult going into a chess tournament, you're always scared to play against these kids because they're basically just prodigies, and especially these kids. These kids are best in the nation, right? Even best in the world. You mentioned Alice has some incredible accolades already, and Tani obviously is world known. So it's tough to play against kids really of any level because there's all these expectations and like there's nothing wrong with losing to kids, right? Because they're the talent in the future. So especially these kids though, but obviously Harvard team, they want to get some wins, and I'm interested to see here, maybe with the rooks being slightly misplayed from white, if Harvard can get some momentum back, and still they're looking for their first win of the match.
Yeah, and white is better here. The pawn structure is definitely better for white. Again, this pawn on d5 in particular is a little bit of a weakness. I would have considered a move like bishop c3 actually, but I think pawn was called out, and I think we'll probably see c3 just defend the c2 pawn. But if white gets a few moves to consolidate, that would have been something. Now the c3 move now makes it very hard now to connect these pieces, and I think that's why bishop c3 would have been strong, because now the rook on e1 is unprotected, and this is a very annoying pin to deal with. I think f3 might need to be played, but you don't feel great about that. Oh, rook e2. Ooh, but look at that. That's another pin. There are pins everywhere.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking just rook e3, but rook e2, and this is kind of awkward.
I don't know how you break these pins, Joe.
Well, okay, the queen unpinned for you, so that was nice. And now rook e3. And yeah, both sides super low. Tani's clock, oh my goodness.
Okay, so Tani's on his own right now. He's on his own, and so is Chris.
Yeah, C4. Look at this discovery. Oh, the queen's hanging.
Oh my god.
Vota's gambit from Chris.
Oh my goodness. And it's about to be 4.5 to half.
Oh my god.
All right, we got to instant replay that for a second.
Okay, I mean,
We had a
actually,
time
I thought that
scramble.
maybe there were some sacrifices. I'm not
Just
sure.
some face
And then
palms.
boom, C4 unleashing their
Wait,
really
I just
nice
messed
move by Tani. Black probably should just play queen takes b2 and
Yes,
snack on a
I don't
pawn.
idea.
instead of
Would not
And
work.
still
Guys
probably
were
be
just much
better.
better
But
throughout the whole game.
no.
We hear the
I
players
thought we just had knight g6 somewhere, and
analyzing.
it was just after rook e3, knight g6, and white has nothing. I think rook e3, knight g6. I think was like
Rook
17
E2
or
is
something.
an absolutely terrible move.
Wait,
You know,
but D4 is fine, right? Because
That was true. Rook
Knight
e2
f4,
was a
queen
very
g4, and then I don't
bad
have
move.
anything.
Pinning.
you know, after Rook C3, and then you play Queen
Well,
A4.
at least Tani's
After Rook C3,
talking about
Queen
his own
takes
moves there.
C5.
Yeah.
Wait, why did you play Queen C4? Why didn't you just go Queen B6?
Queen
Oh,
c4.
yeah, I
Why
have
not
queen
queen
c6 as well.
b6? Just
I mean,
defending the
queen
pawn.
c4.
Good question.
Wait, after
Game
rook
five,
c3,
game
knight
five,
takes.
game five.
I thought I like didn't consider Queen C4 because I just thought you're
Guys,
like
game 5.
oh.
Game started.
All right.
Alright, so
The game has started, so we're gonna shift back over there in
yeah,
one moment. But man, this is
Pawn.
4.5. It's tough sledding for
Knight.
the Team Harvard here.
yeah, I think the match result might
Knight.
be already determined. But
Pawn.
these players obviously, like the Harvard
Bishop.
kids, are not rushing into the next match. They're not necessarily trying to make this comeback necessarily, but they're just
Knight.
trying to play as a team, and they're still looking for their first win. So a little bit of post-game analysis can be helpful because
Bishop.
that could help them get back on the same
Knight.
wavelength and just talking about like,
Pawn.
hey, you played this, I was thinking that. Maybe that'll help
King.
them in the remaining games that they have.
Knight.
Great. So yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. And now
King.
we are back. There's a little bit of a technical difficulty there, but we have the board back
Pawn.
for you. And yeah, Team
That
Harvard
pawn?
needs a win yesterday,
pawn.
and they're going with the English opening to try and get that done. So C4 is a very flexible move, and you could play with in different ways. And they're fianchettoing the bishop here, establishing a foothold on D5, and I think one of the things that the team ChessKid
Pawn.
folks have to worry about is this bishop on C5 being a little bit of a target, particularly to D4 or B4.
Bishop.
I think D4 here would actually be a really nice move, but just keeping the tension here, it's not really so great for
bishop.
white to take. Knight takes D5 doesn't work in the previous position. I'll just show
Pawn.
knight takes D5, pawn takes D5 as a fork.
Uh-huh.
And if bishop takes D5,
Pawn.
you do double these pawns, but in reality, you can pretty
Oops.
much undouble them
Pawn.
quickly with a
Okay.
dwell-time D4. So it's not really a good idea to take on D5. Anyway,
Yeah.
back to
And
the
interestingly, black plays bishop to e6 and then to f5. Is there any sort of subtlety in why to do that?
No, I think actually Alice, if I had to guess, when she said bishop the second time, probably was prophylactically suggesting to drop that bishop back to a7, just so that d4 doesn't come with tempo. So I think Tani kind of went his own way there, because look, the bishop has to go back to a7 now, and
Yeah.
not ideal.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because
Knight.
maybe Tani was thinking, oh, Alice just said bishop twice. Maybe she wanted it here, So
Knight.
there's some give and take between hand and brain where you're trying to maybe try to please your teammate, but ultimately you got to try to play the best move that you see.
Yeah, and it's important that you explain those dynamics, because this is hand and brain, and it's hard to develop that chemistry on the fly. Again, I don't think either of these pairs have ever really done this before against other folks. So they're establishing chemistry on the fly, but this is probably the first position I've really liked of Team Harvard for a while. I think this knight is really great on d5, and black needs to trade some more pieces, but this bishop on a7 it's tough to say whether it's a strength or a weakness. If it manages to break through on d4, it could be a strength. If it's locked in indefinitely, it could be a weakness.
Yeah, and it's interesting because both dark square bishops are pointing right at that d4 pawn. So you mentioned it could be a strength, maybe if the d pawn gets pushed, but at the same time, that opens up for white's dark square bishop too, which could end up becoming a monster on this long diagonal with a move maybe like queen c3 and d5 will hit with a mating threat. So we do see the light square bishops traded off though. And as you mentioned, black is trying to trade off pieces.
King.
So we're going to see the king recapture here pretty quickly. And how does black deal with opening up their bishop?
Oh, sorry. No.
It's okay.
Yeah, shout out to the
Hey,
the
yo,
chat the
what
chatter that
is
said
that?
Harvard's got a great English department
what?
because Team
Wow.
Harvard is playing the English here,
Wait,
and it's
didn't
kind
you
of
say
funny.
knight?
Yeah.
No,
Queen
I
g5 and
accidentally
knight
played it
f6
before she
might be an
said.
interesting idea.
Yeah, I think the players are trying to hear each other. There might have been some confusion there.
Queen.
We do hear queen from Jennifer, and Chris surely will see these threats and these tactics and ideas. So queen g5, it's the most aggressive move. Does he play it?
No, queen f4. Okay, also protecting d4, but queen g5 was a little bit more to the point, if you will. And I gotta go back just for a second to show that. So, oh, whoops, I clicked the wrong thing, but I'll be back in just a moment. Basically, in this position, if I just go back just a moment, if I go queen g5, I'm threatening knight f6 check, and really, there's not a really great way to deal with this without moving the king, because if you go like h6, there's still knight f6. If you go f6, there's still knight f6 as the pin. And so the king might have to scoot over something like king h8. And there might be some tactics with opening up this bishop on b2. So that was kind of a dangerous potential idea. But okay, we have a different position on the board. Queen f4 is played, knight e7. Black still trying to trade pieces. Yeah, I think Team Harvard wants to keep them on the board. So if I was white, yeah, 93 would be my choice as well. Basically, if I can represent the older folks for a minute, I actually want to keep putting the kids under pressure, but d5, another really, really savvy move, does two things. It fixes the pawn on d4 as a target for black's pieces later in the game. It also hems in the bishop on b2. And there's some positions, believe it or not, can I say Ripley's Believe It or Not? Is that still a thing? Where you could go c6, and then this bishop on b8 redeploys via that diagonal. That's an incredible diagonal because the g3 pawn is blocking it a little bit, but it just gets that stability that it might not have on a7.
Yeah, that's really good analysis. And I'm thinking maybe now both sides are going to get that last rook involved in the game, maybe like rook d1 for both, or d8 even. But okay, the knight is coming back. Yeah, you're pointing out e5. That's going to come with a tempo on f7, but the queen's getting hit first. Okay. Pressure on d5 captured. Okay, so not the c6 idea that you had.
That is a risky choice, but it might be a good choice because I actually think you could take this pawn and get away with it because you can reinforce with c5. And that's what the kids are noticing. And they have a 3-minute advantage. This is appallingly stark. This is incredible. Why are the kids so fast?
It's their youth. But yeah, okay. I was wondering if you could trade bishops. No, there's no time to take on b7, either now or afterwards, because either your knight's going to hang on g4 or there's going to be like rook b8, skewer. So yeah, the kids are mopping up here. They're just simply up a pawn.
Clear pawn up, and now the Harvard crew is under 20 seconds. So I believe that Chris is on his own now, and he's going to have to make some good moves and not a lot of time. Whereas, you know, f5, wow, very aggressive. I would have gone for a totally different choice, but it's actually, wow, f5, very aggressive. D3 now, and now maybe knight c4 is a possibility later.
D3, is there f4?
Yeah, but f4 weakens the whole second rank. So then this knight could come to c4, g4, and the rook could come down to e2. It's a risky choice.
Okay, so knight f3, trying to remove the defender of d3. And I think Harvard's going to be able to get that D pawn back.
Right, but keep in mind, black still is an outside passer, so even pawn endgames are advantage black. So if, the trade of pieces doesn't necessarily help everything, and now this knight can come back to d6 and sit on a wonderful blockading square.
Yeah, that isolated D pawn is going to be blockaded pretty easily, but no, we see B5 first. The knight could drop back whenever, so taking a bit of queenside space first.
I think actually B5 was a mistake because it actually gave white the opportunity to play A4 and get rid of their weakness, because B takes A4 would have hung the knight when it was on C4.
Yeah, so okay, D7 kind of forced here, but then knight B6, I don't see how white holds on to this pawn. So perhaps Jennifer was thinking of some other pawn pushes.
Yeah, this is clearly better for black now, and the knight is going to insert itself on C4. The king is going to come in, and the time situation is not improved.
Yeah, this is going to be smooth sailing for the chess kids. I'm going to be very impressed if Harvard can even hold this with this kind of time management.
So pawn, yep, just keeping everything covered. Continue to push A5, A4 now makes sense. Pawn, yep, that's played. The kids are taking space on both sides of the board. Full court vision here.
Yeah, now the knight's kicked back to the back rank.
You could trade rooks now.
This is just really smooth technique here from.
And look at that knight preventing the king from coming in.
Yeah. So now maybe king f2, but no, just creating a passed pawn.
Take the pawn on b3. Don't play a3. The knight can still blockade. Although actually a3 would have also worked. Now this king just walks in.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
We're maybe even seeing some pre-moves here. They're just an autopilot.
King d4 is such a nice move here. When you're 3 squares away from a knight horizontally or vertically, it can't check you for multiple moves. So it's such a nice move to make.
On rook d6 after knight b6.
And we hear resignation.
Is it 5.5?
Oh,
yeah.
B6, rook d6, and it probably will be. It looks draws, right?
I mean, I think at some point there was a plan to a pawn also. Pawn to the queen side.
We're listening in, folks.
We're just down so much time.
That wraps it up from Chris. You heard it from himself. They are down a lot of time. So I don't know if it's the hand that's causing the time issues or the brain, but I do hear we have another game underway.
And we're getting to it right now. And we have, wow, the kids are, open up the bag now. They feel pretty good about themselves, up 5.5. We got B3 on the board. Have you ever played this in your life, Joe?
Well, me personally, I can't say I have. I'm an E4 guy through and through, but I know B3 is still pretty solid and flexible.
It is flexible. I would argue it's not the most solid, but it's flexible. And basically it's gotten a little bit of a renaissance in the last 5 or 6 years, just because, chess players are looking to find new ideas all the time, and it's hard to do that. In general, usually you respond with E5 like Team Harvard did, but you don't fianchetto your bishop. So now that the bishop is on G7, it might give white a little something to work with.
Yeah, the bishops are definitely opposite each other. You got to keep an eye out for that because things tend to open up sometimes. So there's some tactics like, for example, the bishop on B2 isn't defended right now, whereas the bishop on G7 is. And I think trading off those bishops actually favors white, like you mentioned. If white has anything to play against here, it's maybe creating some of these dark square weaknesses around black's king.
Yeah, and your observation is really important, because what that actually means is instead of e takes d4, knight takes d4 is actually a really much better choice. And the reason for that is you're actually threatening already to exchange these dark square bishops. So let's just say a sample line like this happens. The king on G7 is just a little bit airy. And a lot of times it's easier for white to kind of control this majority and play against
Bishop.
the 4-on-3 here than it is for black to really make progress. So it tends to be a little bit easier for white to build up behind their pawns, and for that reason, usually white is slightly better, but different game. And we'll get back to the live position, which is actually a very nice one for Team Harvard, because this d4 pawn is going to be under fire.
Yeah, how do you defend that?
You don't.
Well, trying to defend with offense by putting more pressure onto d5. So if you're Harvard, do you try to defend d5 first, or are you just taking on d4 right away?
I think you take on d4, and part of the reason for that is because when you have bishops staring each other on the diagonal, the protected one is always going to be the one that feels more secure. And in this case, the bishop on g7 is protected and the b2 one is not. And so there's a lot of tactics and discoveries based upon, at the right moment, knight f3 or knight f2. And it's why this bishop dropped back to e4 instead of f3, because this bishop now on b2 is a real liability. And one of the rare positions today where the two bishops is not a strength at all.
That's interesting observation. I like queen c7, connecting the rooks like you mentioned, and freeing up the d8 square for the rook to come and line up some discoveries against white's queen. So I'm maybe expecting a queen move, but it's not so clear where to go.
It's just not easy. And queen d3 is a nice attempt, basically, but this knight is controlling so many squares that white is in some trouble here, because the discoveries are abundant. And so queen c4, again, darting out of the way, but again, there's also this pin here, and this bishop on b2 is a liability. I think black could easily just go rook e8, and then again, this bishop is going to be a problem.
Yeah, so I think that queen d3 was a good development move, but a pivot square, basically, because black's rook comes to the d file anyway, so the queen has to move again. c4, and as you mentioned, rook e8, now rook e1, and yeah, there's gonna be there's so many tactics in the air that white has to just keep in mind. It's definitely easier for black to play here.
Now, you know something? I'm starting to change my mind just a little bit, because what Tani's done the last few moves, and Alice's suggestions have something to do with that, is consolidate in a way that was really hard to imagine a few moves ago. Somehow the queen skirted out of trouble. The rooks are connected. And this queen, if it gets attacked, can dart back to f1, strangely enough. I'm shocked about releasing the tension here, because now the pin will be a problem once again. But I started to feel like the worst was over for white.
Yeah, and now we see both rooks potentially trading off. And the kids are playing still pretty quickly, right? They're up over 30 seconds. We hear Jennifer calling for a rook, giving a lot of flexibility to Chris. He takes with check. And with this bishop pin, there's always like these knight a4 d1 kind of maneuvers, which not ideal by any means, but still you could get out of that pin if you wanted to.
Yeah, and h6, I was recommending h5 there with my arrow, but h6 makes sense because you really need to give your king luft before you entertain moving the rook to a really active space like d2. Like if you played rook d2 right away, which is very desirable, because if bishop c1, there's a pin here. Essentially, there would have been rook e8 check, which forces the bishop to f8. And now all of a sudden, white can kind of take over the initiative with bishop c1 anyway. And then at some point, maybe bishop h6 becomes a mating threat if the knight is not there. So really important to give an escape square first, as was played in the games, that you'd have to block with bishop f8.
Yeah, really nice attention to detail from the Harvard team. And now we see the rook coming to d2.
Desirable.
Yeah, that's the most active square. So we see the check. King's going to step up to that flight square.
And the question is what is white going to do about a move like queen f4 or something like? There's some potential attacking ideas now against the white king, and this pin is very annoying. So if I'm white here, I want to solve the pin first. This rook is way too active to be tolerated for any extended period of time. And also knight d4 is an idea as well.
Oh man, I feel like this could be Harvard's first win. It just feels very awkward for White's pieces, and Black's pieces have so much more activity just across the board.
No question. No question. In fact, also Bishop D4 is a threat. I mean, there's so many threats now against F2 because if, let's say, White passes and goes like A3, just for argument's sake, after Bishop D4, you can't even go for a move like Rook E2 because then you lose a
Then
piece to Bishop takes C3.
Yeah.
So you're really hard pressed to defend F2 in a sensible way.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking like Bishop C1 walks into the pin the other way with Rook D3. And maybe, yeah, like you got to go back somewhere to defend the knight.
You do have to go back. You absolutely do have to go back, and it's just not desirable.
Okay, so there's your knight move.
Rook E4 manually stopped Queen F4. That was the point of that move from the chess kids.
Yeah, and look at how awkward White's queen is. Just A3. The knight's attacking again. And
wow, knight B5. Is that a winning tactic? Wait, no, but knight takes B5 is a tempo on the queen.
Yeah, this could be an out. No,
that might have been missed by Team Harvard. That knight takes B5, you could just trade and then take on G7. And actually, at the end of that line, Queen C3 would have run the rook on D8.
Wow.
Or on D2, rather.
Yeah, but it was missed by perhaps all 4 players as we heard a queen called out.
Oh, wait. Whoa. I spoke way too soon. Knight takes B5, rook D1 is checkmate.
Oof.
Hold on. These kids are trickier than these kids are always tactically alert. The kids are tactically alert. They know what they're doing.
They know better than me, at least. I can't even keep up. So yeah, no, these kids are too tricky.
Yeah. Okay. So different. They're still holding on by a thread is what it looks like. I still would bring that knight back to D4 if I was Team Harvard and then find another way in. And I think that's what's going to happen right now. Yeah, knight D4, Queen A3, and then find some other way in. There's more than one way to roam here. So if this queen somehow could get it and insert itself somewhere, maybe even a quiet move like Queen D7 and then Queen F5, there might be enough time for that.
Whoa, sacrificing the bishop here.
Is that a blunder?
Is White trying to play for rook D4, sacking in exchange?
Yeah, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if maybe Tani just didn't want to go into some perpetual with Queen A3, but they didn't have to bring the knight back to B5.
Yeah, it's maybe too ambitious. But I think it is safe to say, given the time situation, that the chess kids have actually probably won this match. So maybe they're just mixing it up here.
Yeah, I don't think the question of the results is
pawn.
I don't think that Harvard can come back from this deficit with this time control, with the time remaining, but obviously they still want to try to play their best, and I think we're all trying to root for Harvard at least to get one win at the very least. But okay,
I'm shocked.
Yeah, not taking the bishop.
That was a free bishop, and I wonder if the pawn move that Jennifer suggested to Chris was maybe F5 or something like that. Maybe just trying to get the material in a different way, because after F5 the bishop is still hanging. So if you move away, you just lose a piece for free. And maybe it would have forced rook takes D4, which would have been an even savvier way to win the exchange. So, but I'm shocked by that decision.
Yeah. Bishop C1 now is played, rook to C2, and yeah, attacking the bishop. Bishop comes out with a tempo on the queen. I'm sure the queen's going to defend the knight. And now, are there like any knight discoveries?
There are some very dangerous tactics potentially with knight E2 down the road. I could see some rook takes C3, knight E2 business. In fact, now rook takes C3, queen takes C3, knight E2 and the queen is hanging. So that's I think what Team Harvard is looking at. But both sides now are basically under 20 seconds. So playing on their own now.
Yeah, bishop to e5 makes a lot of sense. You're trying to neutralize those discoveries. And okay, knight here, that's going to attack the pinned piece, which is defended by the bishop just barely, but it's not so clear how to get out of this.
Got to trade on g7 and then just go rook e3. Just cover the knight with rook e3 and then hope for the best, because that pin is very tough to parry.
Okay, that's exactly what we see in the time scramble. Both sides under 10 seconds.
And now maybe queen d2. Okay, queen d6. No, knight takes b5. Oh, no, there was rook c1.
Yeah, that mate again.
Again, these tricks from the kids.
Okay.
Tricks are for kids, right? Isn't that what they say?
This is not sponsored, but okay. I love queen c4 attacking the pawns. I mean, it's just queen and pawn endgame now.
Trying to transpose to a king pawn endgame because the outside passer would have been whites.
Yeah, there's a check. Another check. You think they're gonna go for a perpetual?
No, it's gonna pick up this pawn.
Wow.
And white is actually winning now. White,
oh my
the
goodness.
kids have an extra pawn, and a5. The idea is to go queen c3 check and then take on a5, and this is a winning endgame now.
Wow. No,
Centralize the queen. There are no checks, and you'll slowly improve. You'll very slowly improve. Go h. Oh, I would have gone h4. This is a winning position with precise play, but it's going to be hard to do that with such little time. Although they're gaining time with increment here. Queen d7, defend g4, and look at f7.
Very
that would
active.
be my choice. There we go.
Yeah, and we saw when they get in the time scrambles, they're no longer relying on the brain. We saw Tani tricked Chris earlier with that c4 discovery, winning the queen. So I definitely am going to give Tani some props here for how tricky he is in these time scrambles at the end of the game. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Chris is going to be able to hold, or if Tani's just going to be able to convert this again. And I feel like, okay, there's a check.
Yeah, now f7 is hanging. So basically, queen b6, yeah, a6 is coming. They're just not going to be enough checks. And actually, if the queen now tries to threaten a check, I'm going to go queen b2 first with check, hitting g7, covering e2, and then pushing the a pawn. There are just no checks.
Yeah, that's really, or pushing first, I guess. Okay, well,
why allow these checks though?
Checks. Yeah, queen h2 is a check.
This is not. This is giving white more chances, or black more chances than they deserve. But okay, this pawn should rule the day for sure.
The king is coming up now. Now there's queen block with check. Yes,
that was the trick.
Yeah, and you see Jennifer shocked there.
Wait, didn't we just have rook takes b2?
Like, yeah, rook takes b2.
For like 80 moves.
Okay, well, also we were winning after that too.
What?
No, I don't
know.
know.
Queen f6.
Wait, after queen c4,
no,
you just take on b2, right?
No, just knight b5. Just take
on b2.
And then
yeah, I know. Yeah, but also after that, you had just queen f6. When the knight was on c3, knight was on d5, queen f6.
Yeah, queen f6.
They're talking about the rook.
Yeah, everything was.
Everything was winning in that position.
I thought
everything was winning, but they didn't win. I mean, it's again the resourcefulness, even in tough positions, is the chess kids have killed it here. So, and we are under 5 minutes, so this might actually be our last game of the match. But man, what a match it has been. A 6.5 half, if I'm not mistaken, Joe.
Yeah, I don't know if the score necessarily matters anymore at this point. But it's definitely been all chess kids from the get-go. And as you called it, this could be the last game, which means it's the last opportunity for Team Harvard to get a full point on the board. They definitely had their opportunities in that last game, and unfortunately for them, weren't able to close it out. And we don't see e4. We go back to d4 here, and this is a Benoni.
And it's really an old Benoni. When you go d4, c5 right away, I have to show this. Typically, you get the structure with d5, and then normally you see something like e5, which becomes like a check Benoni type of setup. It's a little bit worse than the normal Benoni, if I'm being honest. But the move you have to play is d5 to kind of punish this. you
Knight.
kind of pass like ships in the night, and you take more space. By
Bishop.
playing e3, you kind of allow
Knight.
black to get away with this, and the
King.
position now that black has
King.
is much better than they normally should have.
Pawn.
Although d5 here is a move that should be played to play against this Isolani on d4.
Pawn.
Yeah, I used to play the Benoni, and then I was like, this is just not a good opening. So I was too tired of seeing d5 on move 2. So I'm also surprised maybe white didn't go for that. Instead playing, as you called it, the old Benoni. And I mean, even black didn't play for d5 either. So
Bishop.
yeah, kind of an interesting opening choice for these two teams.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of freestyling here. But yeah, we have an interesting position on our hands now where black has some control in the center, white on the dark squares, white has some control on the light squares. And I'm still wondering who's going to connect their rooks.
Bishop.
That's going to be my barometer here, Joe.
And we see white giving up the dark square bishop
Knight.
here for the knights. And
Bishop.
is that kind of curious to you? Normally, I like to try to trade off that bishop for the fiend-kettled bishop, but black is now both sides
Jenny,
with.
did you say knight or wait?
Oh, I guess white can
not
take the
saying
bishop
yet.
back now.
Yeah, I actually think black was better here. I think honestly in this position after knight d5, just going bishop g7, keep that bishop pair, bringing this bishop to e6.
Queen.
Maybe even go knight e7 to neutralize the knight on d5. I think black has the long-term prospects. Even after knight takes f6, queen takes f6, still not. Yeah, and okay, they go
Rook.
bishop g7. So the two bishops now are a real asset, and really it's a question of whether this knight is
Knight.
going to have enough of a foothold, and I don't see it.
Yeah.
Well, bishop f3 is a pretty nice move here. Just solidifying.
b5.
Yeah, b5,
Rook.
b3.
Rook.
And then b5.
Pawn.
Yeah.
There you go.
Shake
Pawn.
the tree.
Yeah, b3, I think. Yep.
You have to like black here, just with the bishop
Pawn.
pair. This d4 pawn is a potentially dangerous pawn.
Pawn.
And yeah, for now the knight is fine, but you just don't know later in the game. You don't know. There might even be some ideas to undermine this knight with like rook c5 or something like that. So here we go.
Yeah.
Queen.
Maybe the rook can even shift over to a5 and hit a2 at the right moment. Queen a5 seems nice as well.
Ooh, and this sets up a trick, right? Rook takes d5.
The kid. See, I was saying queen a5. It's like a calm move, just trading. Tani and Alice, they're just constantly looking for tricks.
Yeah, and that was the same tactic you
Rook?
pointed out in one of the
Yeah.
earlier games. So I'm curious to see though, like you mentioned, the knight maybe is questionable in the future, but it all depends on the c4 pawn. And black is just putting up a ton of pressure there.
Yeah,
King.
and a7 pawn was hanging, but the rationale is that the c4 pawn is loose. Although 97 check, maybe
Ooh.
that was missed by the kids.
Uh-oh. So this could be a chance for the Harvard team to get their first win of the match in the final game of the match. This is basically do or die for. I mean, the match is already
You said bishop, right?
determined, but obviously Harvard wants to end on a good note.
Yeah, for sure. Now I think we just heard bishop from the ChessKid. So how are they playing? They can defend the e7 square with a move like bishop f8, or they could take on d5 and try to say, I'm going to get obstacle bishops and try to hold this down. Truthfully, obstacle bishop positions, believe it or not, are seldom drawn if they're heavy piece on the board with and there's still material inbound and there's still pawns. So actually, after bishop takes d5 here, this is actually a winning position for white.
Wow.
And I feel 1,000% confident saying that.
Queen.
There's pressure on f7. The the queening square is a light square, so it's actually very difficult to contest the file. And this d pawn actually hems in the dark square bishop from creating any meaningful counterplay. So this is actually a winning position for white, and it's a question of whether white is able to see again the tricky tactics like rook d5 and rook c1.
Yeah. The queen move not only defending f7 but putting a ton of pressure on c1. So we see that rook gets moved to the b file completely open, And I love that white just has the extra a pawn, and that a pawn is that queening square is protected by the bishop on d5, which is definitely the star of the board right now in the central four squares, controlling the king side pawns. There's a threat on h2, so we see g3, and yeah, you're pointing out rook b7, just piling up on f7. And just going back a couple ideas earlier, when the chess kids called out bishop there to try to defend, we saw that trade. You were mentioning bishop f8. That would have dropped the d pawn, no?
Rook.
Would it have dropped the d pawn? Ah, yes, it would have dropped the d pawn. Yeah, so there were definitely problems, and yeah, it was a tough position to navigate for sure. Actually, there
we see
Team
the
Harvard
exchange sacrifice.
Yeah, Team Harvard has to contend with an exchange sacrifice just to. That's the kids are trying to defend f7, in an active way, and it makes sense because now there maybe is a little bit of a lack of coordination just for the moment with the rook on d1 being unprotected, h3 being loose. So you still got to take some care here. Although this is the live position. So c takes d5, rook takes d5, c takes d5, and then the rook came down to c2, threatening an attack here. And there are tactics all of a sudden. Queen h3 and bishop g3. If you give black those two moves, it's a winning position because of queen g2 mate. So very, very tricky position here.
Yeah, well said. Love the queen on f3. This is like as aggressive as black's pieces can get. So that exchange sacrifice could really pay some dividends here for the chess kids. Yeah, rook b3, very active defense here, trying to flush the queen out. Black can take on d5 if they want.
Or go d3.
Yeah.
d3 is very aggressive.
And still renew the threat of bishop takes g3, because again, it'd be immune from capture because queen g2 would be mate. And the thing I'm trying to figure out is, how did the kids get this counterplay? Like, they were like, how did this happen? How did they manufacture
the exchange sack?
Yeah, but how did they manufacture like exchange sacrifice and then attack?
Queen.
I mean, that level of turnaround, that skill is like, it's just remarkable. It's so easy to curl up into a ball and just has not happened.
Okay, so we see the queen comes back to e3, kind of in desperation to defend. And now this pawn structure is just completely busted for white. I mean, black has so many different pawns to take from. How close is d3 to promoting? Is that a threat, or is rook takes d3 gonna be simple enough?
Yeah, so definitely rook d3, whether it's a capture or not, should be white's next move. Even after d2, rook d3 is quite effective because it keeps the rook babysitting the d2 pawn. The question is how easy is this to win? I think basically after d2, white will go rook d3, and then you could take on a2, or maybe blockade with bishop d6 first. And it's like, is it an easy win? Is it not? But it is winning for white. And I'm just curious what tricks the kids are going to manufacture to make this really challenging. And because I think they're now bragging rights and saying, oh yeah, we didn't even give them a game.
Oh yeah, that would be great if they could go undefeated. But I think what's interesting, your advice going into the second half, is that they got to be up on the clock, and this might be the first and only game that the Harvard kids are actually up on the clock. And lo and behold, it's also one of their best chances to actually win.
Yeah, no question about it. So yeah, wow. So yeah, getting to almost under 30 seconds, and I wonder here if Tani is stalling to get under 20. That's what I want to know.
Well, at this point, you kind of suspect that, right? Like, what's happening with Alice over? I think Alice is maybe just chilling now. It's like all in Tani's hands. What is this time? What is this time? Is he gonna flag?
9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
Move, Tani. No, he's just gonna flag. Wow.
You didn't say a move.
No, I said pawn.
You said pawn.
Oh, you said.
Oh wow, it was just a
Or you said it
misheard.
again. Oh.
You'd think that Tani would ask
Yeah,
for a
I said
piece.
No, after
Well,
just didn't hear
like
just didn't hear Alice there.
No, yeah, I don't know. I mean,
yes, we didn't go. We didn't go.
Yeah, I
Well,
didn't look at like rook takes d5. I thought like rook c7, but Rook 65 is interesting. I just thought like after Rook F1, I didn't see anything.
Yeah.
So
I was like,
basically,
yeah,
I was
when
just
you
like,
said
why do you
rook,
play
I
Rook
mean,
takes
I think after
D5?
Rook B3, you just go Queen takes D5, and it's like a game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Queen
just-
65.
Instead of-
No,
No, but
I don't know why I played it.
after Queen D6 and Queen A4, you said rook, and that kind of
Yeah.
just
Okay. No. I said Rook in some very silly place. Like after Queen A4, I just wandered the pawn. I should have said pawn and then A5.
yeah. Just
Well,
say
as we
Then
we
pawn
hear
better,
a bit
but
more
yeah,
their
you just went-
analysis, Joe,
Okay.
we
Is
the
it-
Harvard folks got on the board on the win in the winning column. They'd had a draw very early on, but I think the final tally, if I'm not mistaken, 6.5, 1.5, and it was really just a commanding performance from Alice and Tani, and really just showcased why they're the players that they are right now. So really impressive stuff. Of course, Jennifer, again, 2-time U.S. Women's Champion. Chris, very good player in his own right. No slouches here, so I don't think it was obvious who would take it. Joe, I gotcha. I think I said I had the kids at the beginning, right?
Oh, for sure. You definitely outpredicted me. But mad props to both these teams. They're definitely still reminiscing about the games. They're gonna remember this for a while. I think that the kids are gonna be. This is a memory for life, really. Like maybe one day they could be a student at Harvard, and maybe they can play the future ChessKid prodigies when they're in college. So this is a really fun event. Maybe more colleges and universities would like to participate in something like this. It's always great to see the students supporting the kids, and vice versa, of course. Like, yeah, we're actually going to take a quick break because we're actually going to bring the players in, I believe, for an interview. So stick around for that, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back. We are back in our post-match interviews with Team Harvard here. We have Jennifer Yu and Chris Shen with us. I'm going to start with Jennifer. Really interesting match. It definitely went, it started off like kind of close, then the Chess Kids pulled away. Did you have any expectations going into this match about how it would go? And have you and Chris practiced or talked about strategy at all?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't really have many expectations going in because I think we should have probably talked about strategy a little bit, at least gone over like what openings we wanted to play. Because honestly, I feel like most of the games were fairly close. It's just at the end, there was like usually like either a little miscommunication or we also had a bit of a time issue where like our time kept running really low. But I think overall, like many of the games were pretty interesting and close. But there were definitely a couple of big mistakes here and there from our side.
Chris, do you think that that's easier to be the hand or the brain when you're doing this stuff? Because I feel like it can depend sometimes. But did you feel like you were more comfortable in one role than the other?
Honestly, I mean, that's a great question. I think being the brain is like better because like, you know, you basically have more quote unquote control over the board, especially in situations where you're looking for like a final combination or things like that. If you're the hand, sometimes it's like, oh my God, like I want to make this move, but I can't. And that's like, can be super nerve wracking and anxious and things like that because you're hoping your partner can see it. So I think I would definitely prefer the brain over the hand, but the hand is certainly a lot of fun as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Joe, go for it.
Chris, I wanted to ask you, apparently you're a former ChessKid player yourself, right? So what's that like being a chess kid and then now you're in college and you're playing against the future chess kids and the future chess prodigies out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, you know, when I was much younger, you know, sitting across the table, you know, I was at a place where, you know, my feet didn't like touch the ground when I sat at the table, right? And now I would be able to upset people that were like high rated, which was super awesome. And now I'm sort of on the flip side of the coin, and you know, I'm being upsetted by some really strong young players. It certainly takes you back, but it's amazing to see how ChessKid has grown throughout the years and how much they're improving at this rate. It's really great to see.
Yeah, it's definitely circle of life dynamics, folks. Circle of life. Although, Jennifer, you are still kind of beating back against these juniors. I mean, you're a two-time U.S. Women's Champion. You won it in 2022, most recently. Do you feel like chess is? Do you feel like you're able to still keep up that level while you're throughout the year, or is it just really hard with classes, or like how do you? This is all over the place, but how do you get into game shape? Because you've basically shown incredible level when you step off campus sometimes, right?
I think that's a really tough question for me to answer because that's also something that I'm constantly exploring and trying to improve on. I think most recently, like I was just having a tough time in the most recent US championship to balance school and chess. So chess kind of took a bit of a, I think it was pretty evident from my performance that I was not the most, you know, I didn't put the most work in beforehand just because it was a lot of balancing. But I think it's just something you're constantly working on, like for me, for my like entire career, just because it's been tough to play tournaments throughout the school year. I didn't play many tournaments this year in total, I think, but hopefully next year I can kind of make a comeback in that way. But yeah, it's definitely something I'm constantly learning and trying to improve on.
That makes a lot of sense, Jennifer. And you mentioned like it's harder maybe to compete and do school at the same time, but there's also a lot of tournaments specifically for schools. Obviously, I've been running the Collegiate Chess League and I've mentioned that earlier. But there's also Pan Ams, and I know that you guys went last year. Do you guys plan on returning to that this season?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Pan Ams is one of the main tournaments that as college students we get to play, and it's a ton of fun because you get to see many of the people that you grew up playing with and go to a variety of different schools all over the U.S. and coming together, you know, in I think typically in the winter. It was a ton of fun last year, and we're certainly prepared to. I think we already booked tickets to this year's Pan Ams.
Awesome, yeah. And you guys also have a match against your rivals in Yale coming up soon too, right?
Yeah, that's Friday night, usually the night before the big rival football game.
Awesome. Well, good luck to you guys. Thanks for the games. It's been a pleasure to watch and appreciate all your time.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right, so
So-
we're gonna transition here to speaking to folks that are in the winner circle here. The chess kids, Alice, Lee, and Tani, Adewumi. I'm gonna start with Alice because I'm just gonna start with Alice. Have you played with Tani before? Did you know? Did you have to establish chemistry on the fly, or were you familiar with each other's game?
I think we had a match sometime this summer where it was like 10, 20, probably like around 15 games. So I think we're like pretty familiar with each other. So I wasn't sure how like good of a team we'd be in Hidden Brain because I think our styles are slightly different. But I definitely was happy to see the results, and I was happy with the way that we played, except for some games. But overall, pretty good.
Gotcha. And Tani, what was it like playing with Alice? Well, like the chemistry, did you feel like you guys were on the same page? Because the score said you were, but it's always tough to tell when you're actually playing, right? So let me know.
I would say like for me and Alice, I guess when we're playing, I feel like she's better at the brain, but really good at the brain, but it, I mean I get I'm not, I mean I don't know to say this point.
I noticed there were a lot of queen pawn openings, like queen pawn structures and so on, and I was like, okay, like maybe they have a little bit of a game plan here, or they understand what type of positions they want to get. And did you feel that at all, or was it just kind of like freestyling and whatever happens happens?
Yeah, it was kind of just freestyle, whatever happens. And it's black. When I was the brain, I just picked very random openings. But you still in the queen, like in the queen's in, still just random.
Gotcha. Joe, take it away.
Alice, I had a question for you. First off, your older brother is actually on the Yale team and one of the rivals of the Harvard team. So I was wondering if you're going to be cheering on your brother in the rivalry match coming up this weekend. Did you know about that?
Yeah, I didn't know this weekend, but I know it's like the night before the Harvard Yale game. I mean, probably because of my brother. At least in his game. But I think, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's also really cool that you played against Jennifer already in the Women's Championship. Is Jennifer someone maybe that you look up to, or do you have any other inspirations in U.S. women's chess?
Yeah, definitely. I think, especially since like when I started looking at the top women's tournaments in the U.S., I think Jennifer was definitely one of my biggest role models. I followed a lot of the games on that, and I think she's a really good player.
That's awesome. And Tani, I've seen a lot of content already from you playing against some of the streamers. I saw the video where you beat Alexander Botez, and now you're on stream beating up on Chris and Jennifer from Harvard. I wanted to ask you if you had any aspirations of maybe getting into streaming yourself.
Probably not. I think
No?
I'd rather just be just chess player than streaming.
The thing is, Joe, it's super difficult to be,
Yeah.
almost impossible, I'd say, to improve your game and also be a content creator. And these kids want to be chess players first, right? So I totally get that sentiment. And I guess I would ask you, Tani, what are your most immediate aspirations? Where do you want to go when you see where you want to go in the next 6 months or 12 months or 18 months? What does that trajectory look like for you?
Probably like 6 months, probably I am. Maybe 12 months because I'm going to enter high school, so it's going to start getting difficult. Play chess tournaments, so like maybe in the summer or like let's say 9th grade, summer too. Try to get like a couple norms, maybe like I am in 2 norms, and then I mean we'll see from there. But after I enter high school, it's going to start getting difficult, so I just want to get like I am right now and just consolidate.
Yeah,
It's
I know
awesome.
those. I know those New York City high school days. I did it. You know, I'm not gonna say how long ago it was, but I recall those days well. So, anyways, congratulations to both of you. Thanks for being with us. We are following your chess journeys constantly. I mean, it's just been a joy to see you guys progress the way you have. I mean, it's incredible, and I mean, it's, you know, we're rooting for you. So yeah, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being with us, and best of luck with your chess journeys.
Thank you.
Congrats, guys. Thanks for being here.
All right.
right.
Joe, yeah, no, take it away.
Yeah, so that was an awesome match. Congratulations again to the Chess Kids for beating the Harvard team 6.5 to 1.5. Before you go, we will have one last thing to shout out. Actually, two last things. We have the Chess Kid Festival. Actually, Tani and Alice, are you guys going to be at the at the festival? Did you hear about it in North Carolina, in Charlotte?
When is that?
It's February 16th to 19th.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I haven't planned on it.
TBD.
You're
TBD.
invited. So we'll see if you guys end up going, but it's going to be the first ever, which is very exciting. As I said, it's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina, February 16th to 19th. You can book your tickets now for 4 days of chess festivities, including over-the-board tournaments and opportunities to meet special guests like Gotham Chess, Fun Master Mike, and Chief Chess Officer Danny Wrench, and maybe even Tani and Alice themselves. The festival takes place from February 16th to 19th. Can't wait to see you there. Use !festival in chat to learn more and register today. And for the college kids maybe wanting to tune in to see some college chess action this weekend, the Collegiate Chess League semifinals are on Saturday, followed by the finals on Sunday. So be sure to tune in November 18th at 2 p.m. as University of Texas Dallas takes on UT Rio Grande Valley, and University of Missouri will follow them up to take on St. Louis University. So which teams do you think will win and move on to the finals? Be sure to tune in this weekend using !CCL in the chat for all the info. See you this weekend, and thanks everyone for watching. This has been a blast. Casa, it's been a pleasure.
Likewise, thanks for sticking with us this evening. It's been a lot of fun. Got talent from the Harvard crew, talent from the ChessKid crew, and yeah, to be continued.